Hello, it's Brad Laurie of BlockchainBrad, and today we're speaking exclusively with Nick Chan. He is the co-founder of Refinable. And if you know about NFTs, which is most likely because they are a hot topic right now, then you're certainly going to extend that knowledge today. And that's because we're talking about an NFT Hub specifically designed in connection with the BSC, and that is the Binance Smart Chain. So thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate your time, Nick.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I mean, I've been wanting to go on this interview with BlockchainBrad and to talk about NFT and basically reach a wider audience with exactly what we want to do with NFTs, because I think there's a lot of mysticism around the subject.
Absolutely, mate. And for all those wondering about my position in terms of interest in this or investment, it's really important I am not invested yet. I definitely want to be. And also it's important this interview is entirely free. There's no compensation. I just want all of us to have access to the founders, to the source, so we can learn more. So Nick, once again, let's really explore and extrapolate. We're going to go into all the depths and design of Refinable. Let's start with the very important statement, and that is that you are one, or if not the one, of the first NFT marketplaces on the BSC, on that all-important Binance Smart Chain. What does it mean, that statement? How important is it to have that first mover advantage on the BSC?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think one of our definitely pitches is that there's a lot of interest in NFTs and everyone wants to get in, whether you're a crypto person or a regular person. I think right now there's just a lot of issues with scalability and affordability, as well as accessibility in terms of NFT marketplaces that are on Ethereum. So if it costs you $100 to really mint anything on Ethereum, you won't be able to explore or even test out the smart contracts that are using NFT to explore. And so one of the immediate things that we do want to do is that we want to deploy our platform specifically on Binance Smart Chain. And Binance Smart Chain is, of course, the new ecosystem that's being put forth by Binance. It's heavily supported, and we do think there's a lot of potential in there. And so one of our strategies is that there's not a lot of incumbent players right now in terms of NFT marketplaces on BSC. And so it's more of a blue ocean strategy for us to redefine what exactly NFT experience should be. Because there's no incumbent players, we're also free to sort of come up with our own thesis for how we want to approach NFTs. And so being the first mover in the BSC space is definitely at the top of our important list.
Got it. Now, let's play the devil's advocate for a moment. So you had that blue ocean scenario because there's very little essentially done in terms of the NFT marketplace on the BSC to date. But if we think about all the experimentation that's happened in the Ethereum camp, which has been quite substantial, there's all kinds of, commentary that will come your way. From the more maximalist camp, they'll be saying, look, you just can't move across to the BSC because they're more centralized, they're CDFI, they're not puristic DeFi. So I want to get your take on this. What are you expecting? What are the kind of comments you're coming from all the different the different camps within the Ethereum space, since they are so pro NFT right now, and they've certainly got a plethora of marketplaces as well?
Yeah, I think the scalability issue has always been a topic of conversation on Ethereum. I think there have been great solutions that are proposed, but I do think there's going to be somewhat of an on-ramp time before all of those implementations are put together. So I do look forward to these scalability improvements on Ethereum. I think it benefits us all. However, I do think not everything needs to be centered on Ethereum. I think it has a great development community and the marketing has really been very proactive. But I do think similar to laundry, right? You wouldn't put all your laundry into one basket. You would tend to optimize, different colors or different whites. And I think that's true with different blockchains as well. I don't think it's a winner take all. I think it's kind of a naive to think that one blockchain will rule them all. And I really do think different optimization of different applications will happen. So for example, I think even if scalability issues do come up, I think Ethereum is still very heavy on power. And I think if we want to adopt a more eco-friendly approach, then I think Binance Smart Chain, even though it gives up a little bit more on the centralization part, it does improve way more on the scalability and affordability aspect. And so you see these different nuances, and I think there will come a time, even though it might not be in the next, couple of months, that you'll see people flocking to communities that make more sense for them, right? Whether it's Polkadot, whether it's Polygon, or something else. I do think it's not one chain to rule them all, and it's quite naive to think that it would be.
Yeah, you make a good point. Now, that's been iterated right across the landscape. Even some of the people in Ethereum are really trying to encourage and espouse this multi-chain sort of an analogy or reality as we build more of the blockchains and the infrastructure to make this possible. And what's interesting too is, in the pre-interview, we've had discussions about your position as an agnostic, in the sense that whilst you are the BSC, and obviously with the backing of Binance and so much happening behind the scenes with Refinable, no doubt you're going to maintain that connection directly with the BSC and with Binance. But fundamentally, do you want to comment on how you're positioned should, for example, more scalable solutions emerge?
Yeah, so I think one thing we do want to capitalize on is the new BSC ecosystem. So for a launch, we definitely do want to do the whole BSC play. I think it's a new community. There's a lot of upside in order for us to do this launch. Launching our tokens as a BEP20 token, and just having general community support and being part of something that's new. So I think you touched upon a good aspect that we wanted to focus on for our marketplace, which is the context agnostic aspect. So we're content agnostic, but we also, in the future, we do want to be blockchain agnostic as well. I think the bridge technology between all the different blockchain ecosystems do exist, and we do want to support all of the bridges that can happen, whether it's between BSC and also Ethereum or something else. That is definitely on our roadmap, and it can only add to the synergy that happens on all of these ecosystems, right? There's no point being an isolationist project, right?
Right. Yes, and what's interesting also, it was going to come up later, but we can talk about it now. You also built in the standards, the compatibility for the Ethereum standards for the NFT as well. And so that's surely going to only broaden your reach whilst you initially position with the BSC. Very quickly, you'll have that cross sort of chain compatibility built in for experimentation. And then on top of that, as you've alluded to, your network's only going to grow, because you'll have access to more technologies, you'll have more access to more marketplace interoperability, all kinds of things that could happen technologically and even experimentally as you move on. So are you optimistic that this is just the beginning for you? This is really just the first iteration of what you can be as you build out essentially a more robust platform, not just that, cornerstone NFT marketplace?
Yeah, so I think the definite area that we do want to focus on is NFT as a medium of transaction. So we definitely do want to promote NFTs in terms of how people transact online with different items of different content types, right? So we're looking to expand beyond just digital art and all that area. But I think you mentioned a good point in that, yeah, we do want to be a little bit more than an NFT marketplace. We want to be a marketplace for any item that can be sold in a very strong secondary market, right? And I think you touched upon different ERC standards that we do want to support. So, if you study a little bit more on the NFT space, you understand that there's 721 and 1155 standards. So
right.
They both have different pros and cons. And I think there is a lot of debate in terms of what we should mint in. And I think just within the NFT space alone, there's already a lot of nuances that we are going to play into. Of course, I think 1155 offers a lot more compatibility and options for our users. So I think that's sort of the standard that we want to adopt. And we have the same approach for all of our development work as well, that we want to give our users the most options for them to transact online using NFT technology.
And it's going to be interesting to see if you can get some and garner some of the community support and spirit from the ETH DeFi community, because obviously they are very passionate, like sports teams, and they like to sort of build their own eco. So hopefully there becomes a much more accepting scenario where they do embrace some of that cross-chain compatibility that literally can unfold. Now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about NFT before we go on to discuss team, because really there may be people out there who don't really understand the fundamentals of the NFT, the non-fungible token itself. So do you want to just really quickly talk about what it is, why it matters, and why it's relevant, particularly this year?
Yeah, so I think NFT technology has always been around. I think since CryptoKitties came about in, I believe, like 2017. But I don't think people realize what exactly the potential of this technology really is. And I think a lot of people try to explain it, most namely in the SNL skit that recently just showed up. I think people are still throwing out a lot of big words like blockchain, fungibility. These words aren't very approachable to a lot of layman people, right? And so I think there has to be some kind of a normalization of the definition. And so how I usually like to explain NFT is that this is basically just a unique identifier that can be attached to any items, right? Similar to your national ID, you can attach this national ID to any item in the world, right? So imagine if you use eBay or Craigslist or any of those applications, right? You're buying something that you don't really know where it is. But imagine you have an identifier for this lamp and you can verify that this lamp is from IKEA. then maybe it adds a certain level of security and also authenticity to sort of whatever you're buying, right? And
Right.
that's only for physical objects, right? You can always extrapolate this to what about native files, right? What if I buy a WordPress theme or some other, font type or icon set, and you can resell it on the secondary market, and it can benefit the original creator and you as well. And so I
Right.
do think there's a lot of benefit and sort of the thesis of what we're trying to do over here, which is essentially applying NFT to anything that does with digital transactions.
Yes, and you mentioned the important thing, and that is the identifier. And if you couple that with value as well, literal value, because the token aspect, that part of the term itself, implies there is a monetary aspect built into the NFT as well. The difference is here is that it doesn't change. It's a set value. Is that fair to say with the way that NFTs are built?
Yeah, so the identification is fixed, right? But you're talking about the valuation of the actual item. I mean, the valuation is whatever the community imparts on it, right?
Right.
So I think one also unique aspect is that NFTs, unlike other tokens like Bitcoin or Ethereum, because it's unique, you can't really do price discovery that well. There's no order book keeping track of who will buy at what price.
Mhm.
And so the thesis behind what we want to do is also about NFTs are inherently very, very social, right? Because they're unique, you need a whole community around to basically, impart a certain price around it, because that's the only way that you can really do it effectively. And so the core thing that we want to do is that we want to support different communities on top of Refinable, so that it's the communities that really empower and help NFTs thrive, right?
Right. And we've seen the examples also recently, Nick, with the likes of Beeple, for example, with the very successful artwork going to 70 million or almost hitting that mark. And that was decided by community, as you alluded to, quite rightly. And ultimately, that's how this continues to gain traction, I'd imagine, is establishing greater communities throughout the globe when it comes to being educated about NFTs. I guess the biggest challenge is also making sure there's the right protections in this situation with ownership, for example, making sure that there's no copyability, even though technologically there may be. So how do you mitigate some of those challenges? How do you ensure that it's not just simply the transparency, but there are some validations built in, there are some authentications and proofs of ownership that you can establish?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's worth explaining to, I guess, most people is that NFT is really a technology that can help you identify certain assets, right? The technology itself is quite robust, but what people do with it is hard to manage for our platform. So I think you alluded to a question of, digital assets are very easily copyable. So how do you really de-risk other people's work from being diluted because of other duplicates, right?
Right.
So I think our platform is very aware of that. We want it to be decentralized, and so we're non-custodial as well. So we allow anyone to create content on our platform. But I think there is a huge question between the internal team on how exactly to do this, because this is definitely not a technology issue, it's a process and operations issue. And so we do have certain processes in place to basically say, hey, if this is a objectionable content, then we will remove it from our marketplace. Even though we can't remove it from the blockchain, we can definitely remove a certain interface for people to interact with this objectionable item, right? So
Right.
that's one of the ways that we can really do it. But in terms of just avoiding the issue of duplicated content, I think that's really, really hard. And it's really about finding who the verified content really is, and having people do their own due diligence on the blockchain, because that's what it's really good for. And I think people will really have to do their own due diligence and be smart about sort of the how to value and how to authorize or double check the item that they want to purchase. And so I think it's really about giving responsibility back to the user.
Yes, and you raise a really good point with that self-custody as well, and the fact that by design, being a marketplace, you really are just a facilitator between the two parties of the buyer and the seller, for example, in this instance, much like we see the likes of eBay, except you're doing this in the context of, a more CDFI, CFI scenario with the different technologies that underpin what you're doing, and also the platform that you're providing. So it's interesting that, ultimately the onus is on the user fundamentally. But do you think that in the future it might be prudent to perhaps engage with legal entities in the future when we have the technology that catches up and the legal frameworks that catches up? Maybe it's worth having a conversation with different parties in the blockchain domain who are also synergizing with NFT marketplaces to facilitate you as you build globally in the different jurisdictions. Do you think that that's something that might be worthwhile to explore?
I think that's a pretty interesting thing, and we're definitely open to securing our assets or securing content so that we give confidence to our users, right? So it really depends on what kind of capacity that we're bringing the legal people in. So I usually like to believe in the goodness of people, and I think using the carrot more than the stick is a slightly better analogy. And so if we're really bringing the legal team in to really hammer down on some of these objectionable content, then I think it's not the best approach that I would say. So the example that I like to give is really that I think people are generally good and don't like to break copyright or any other laws. And so right now I think the carrot solution would really be giving users the option to, not break these rules and allow them to, say, create copyright content based on an original Genesis token so that they can pass on those copyright fees to the original creator. So I think giving people the option to do these will definitely help mitigate some of these issues that brands are fearful of fans just desecrating their content or their IPs. So I think I would like to approach it from a way of rewarding good users rather than banishing or punishing or bad actors.
Makes sense. And it's a great way to start, isn't it, really, when you think about it, because you always have the opportunity to bring in some of those protocols and processes and support networks if you need them, because obviously you're an optimist as well with the human condition. So that's a great thing. But let's talk about your team now, Nick, because that's quite diverse as well. Even by name, you can tell that there are people from different parts of the world. Do you want to touch on the expertise? I guess let's start with the tech savvy members of the team, those that are the engineers. Obviously, you have a co-founder beside you doing that, and then perhaps the biz side, because they need to balance out.
Yeah, so I want to give a shout out to my CTO and also co-founder Maxim. So Maxim's been with me since day one, and he's basically a coding genius and a serial entrepreneur as well as a serial CTO. So he has basically worked at EY and led experimental projects over there. He's basically built a couple of other staking contracts or crypto projects as well around the space. And so he was able to basically build the back end and the first few smart contracts on Binance Smart Chain in the first 2 weeks of this year. And so he's a fantastic talent, and we've been slowly building out the development team with his lead. So I think now we're around 5 or 6 developers or so and counting. Also, I have a few friends who have joined us in the capacity of contributors, and so they were also previous EOS hackathon winners, and so they did something very similar with NFTs a while back before NFTs were even a hot thing. And so I'm super happy to have them join us as well.
That's fantastic. So you've covered the base when it comes to the techies that we desperately need to really showcase that you can do this and prove that you can by code. Now, what about in that instance, if anyone wants to go and check the code, is it open source yet in your current roadmap position, or will it take us time to really assess, what your techies are building when it comes to the marketplace itself?
Yeah, so we definitely do have the intention to be open source. I think right now we're already going through security audits with Hacken or Certic as well. And so we definitely do want our codes and smart contracts to be verified so that there shouldn't be any issues with executing or just experimenting on our platform. So I do think other platforms out there haven't really passed security audits for their own smart contracts. So we definitely do not want to make that mistake, and we want everyone to feel safe that we are a trusted source for them.
Are you going to be using more than one audit? I didn't quite hear. I know you said Certic, so that's one example. But we've also seen, not to single out Certic, because they all have just demonstrated some challenges, or they've shown that exploits can happen, hacks can happen. I prefer the term exploit. And certainly it's been an issue for many of the auditor providers. So are you going to make sure that you do more than one, access more than one auditor throughout the process, or are you going to rely, wholly and solely on Certic?
Yeah, so right now we are actually in talks with multiple security audit firms. So Hacking and Certic are basically the two that we're talking to. So we're trying to split up basically the audits so that we can get the widest breadth and different eyeballs looking at the code that we're putting out there. So I think this is generally a good move for the community as well. And the more people that we have involved, the more secure, the better I feel about our community.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've been moving quite quickly as well, Nick, because from the outset, as we've talked about pre-interview, you had this idea with your team. Also, your advisors were part of that, the sort of the idea creation and the curation. But now it's time to really bring out the code for proof at some point. So how have you achieved this in such a short period of time to really give us confidence that you're at the stage that you should, it just seems like you're really accelerating. And that's why I ask you this. You must have teams that are of devs who are working pretty hard 24/7 right now, because you haven't been around, as I understand, that long as Refinable.
Yeah, so I think two things, right? I think it really goes to the quality of the team that we have. So I think the project started with basically me and my CTO, as well as a few other partners, including Box Mining, who was basically there from the start to help guide us and advise us on what the right process should be and what the mistakes that we should avoid are. So I think that actually helped us out a lot in terms of building our team and funding our vision and carving out an MVP. So the second thing is really, I briefly touched upon it just now, which is basically the carving of the MVP. So we do have a lot of vision in terms of what we want to do. So if you look at our roadmap, there's quite a lot of stuff that we think are very helpful to our community, and these are like the cornerstones of what we do want to accomplish. But I think in terms of the acceleration and sort of the experience that we want to deliver for a public beta and also the official launch, I think that really comes down to the team's decision on what exactly the MVP needs to be. So once we have a very clear vision on what we want to launch with for day one, I think that gives us a lot of clarity and sort of vision on what exactly we need to do, right, and what the experience should be. So I think it really comes down to those two things.
Right. And do you feel like you're on track? Because obviously the roadmap's pretty, as you said, full, and it's there's a very optimistic plan for this year. Everything, all the milestones, every plan that you put in, have you achieved that as a target, that now you can move on and be comfortable that you're going to hit the position of the MVP when you intend? Same thing for example, the mainnet in Q2. Are you on track?
Yeah, so we're actually pretty good on track. I think our initial timeline, we were a little bit more conservative in that area. So obviously I would like to under promise and over deliver all the time. And so I think we are actually doing quite well in that area. So I think even though our roadmap is really focusing on the high level features, there's a lot of details in the execution and the experience that we want to give out. So I think those are really the points that we do want to hammer out. And so I would say that we're very on track, and we do hope to have a public beta out very, very soon.
Okay, well, that's good to know, because obviously people will be checking more and more as it comes to those key events when you emerge from many of the speculators who are going to really start to really show, I guess, what hype can do when it comes to a first mover in BSC for an NFT marketplace. But if we go back to the biz side for a moment, now, obviously it's one thing to have the techies, but if you don't have the good business and entrepreneurship beside you with the marketing obviously built in, and you've got that with your advisors too, then it's very difficult to create that all important traction in the beginning. So walk us through a little bit more of the biz plan, exactly how you have the right expertise in your team and advisors to really uplift the techies and support them.
Yeah, so on the business side, there's actually a lot of new interesting developments that we've had. So, just a little bit about the team. So, Box Mining is a great advisor. We also have a couple other partners that are quite connected into the regular non-crypto space. And so basically one of the first things that we wanted to do is secure a partnership with, an IP provider that is able to, give us content that, are branded and are beloved already, right? So I think early on, we established a partnership with a Korean Lisco called TuniPlay, and so TuniPlay they have access to a lot of different IPs and brands across Asia. So that is something that we aim to leverage. So on the business side, I think that's one of the small things that we have done to basically have another on ramp for content and also community to come in, right? And so on the other side, we also have artist outreach teams that are talking to different artists that are helping us build that community of the first cohort of users. And so right now, just based on our value propositions of being more affordable and accessible and also eco-friendly, a lot of artists have actually reached out based on that, looking to work with us. So we're actually getting a lot of organic validation from the community on what we're actually doing. So on the business side, we're really separating it into, what is the organic user onboarding process going to look like, as well as what is the, enterprise route going to look like as well. We do want to have a 1-2 punch on, user generated content as well as brand IPs and also other content that are already beloved by the world. So I think these
Yes.
two combined are going to give us the best bang for our buck.
And that's really interesting because obviously you want to capitalize on what's already out there in terms of, because also you're not targeting solely just the NFT marketplace, but you want to move out into really any goods as it's
Mhm.
referenced. And so in doing so, you also want to make sure that you're leveraging everything to bring in some of those mainstream users from different marketplaces, different verticals as well. And so, obviously the biz strategy is going to be key to bring that in. Now, one of the things that does really stand out when I talk to you is Asia. And the reason being is because you have the BSC right there. You have everything that's been built around Binance itself, beautifully positioned in Asia, as you know. And me being Aussie, one of the reasons I think it's so important to have the discussion is we can never underestimate when it comes to NFTs, the power of Asia, because a lot of the attention and traction is there when it comes to the blockchain. So do you feel that you've got a huge potential untapped? Have you realized, are you really aware of just how many different countries are in this ecosystem of blockchain demand that you can really capitalize on to really showcase perhaps what hasn't been done before with an NFT marketplace?
Yeah, so I think geography is a super interesting, subtle difference that we also have. Because if you notice, a lot of the other NFT marketplaces, they really focus on Western content and Western user base, right? So I do think the BSC is a huge chance for us to develop the NFT experience within Asia. So one very interesting thing that I recently heard from one of my friends who collects art as well as is active, in the crypto community. So he basically mentioned that people like to collect art locally, right? And because all of your users are, hopefully, there's different users from all around the world, right? You would prefer to have different tastes and also different things that you like. And
Mm.
so we do feel like there's a lot of Asian content that hasn't been tapped into yet. So we're talking about Asian brands, we're talking about Asian style art, we're talking about Asian theme art, right? And so I do think if we want to focus on sort of the Asian area, this would be a great time and opportunity to do so. I mean, I'm personally based in Hong Kong as well, so I have a huge network over here. The rest of the team is all based around Europe as well. So I think if these two markets are currently untapped, I think there's a great chance to create local communities for these NFT experiences.
Yes, and we talked also pre-interview about the fact that when we see other blockchain systems and ecosystems, more importantly, being based so strongly in Asia and in like places like Berlin, for example, in Europe, there's every likelihood that there'll be more synergies in the future to support those kinds of regions and the innovations that you're bringing forth. For example, in the future, there may be, or there will be, an NFT hub for Polkadot. We know this will happen. And so over time, those bridges will become so important because, as we know, there's a strong representation of Polkadot in China or in Asia. And so these collaborations just are so powerful in the future. I can only imagine. But you are that first mover right now, and that's where it is so interesting. That's why I wanted to talk to you, one of the reasons. Now, let's explore a little bit more on what it means to be an NFT hub for all limited goods. That's what it states in your information. So can you give us some examples so people understand what this would translate to, if we move beyond just the NFT itself?
So we really think about I guess, the funnel for NFT experience, right? So at the very start, you basically have four stages. So you really have a creation stage, you have a discovery stage, you have a trading stage, and you have a leveraging stage. So what does that really mean? So I like to say that these are the four verticals that we want to focus on. So
Mm-hmm.
creation really surrounds sort of how NFTs are created and what you're tokenizing. So I think there's a lot of options and different nuances that happens inside of there, such as, are you minting as a 721 or 1155? Are you minting with what kind of settings and metadata that you want to collect? So we want to give our users the most amount of options and flexibility for them to customize whatever good they want to put on sale. So that's really encapsulates the creation experience. So next up is really the discover vertical, which essentially we are a marketplace. So you need to have a fun and engaging way to find the items that sparks joy for you, right? And so I spoke about this slightly earlier with Refinable wanting to support different communities. So how do we support all the different types of communities that have different sort of discoverability and also keywords and taggings? So all of that is really encapsulated with how our marketplace is designed and what we do want to cater for. So discover is really about finding what you want easily, right? And the third part is really on the trading. So, after you found what you want, the trading aspect of how you buy it, what you settle the currency in. Are you doing an auction or a fixed price sale? I think all of these are different ways that people, like to structure their listings or their sales or their livelihoods even. And so giving people the option to really, sell things or distribute their goods at any way, I think is really important. So the final vertical is really what we call leverage, right? So after you own an NFT, what can you really do to extract the value from it? And I think we see a lot of different gamification elements with NFTs. So you can stake it to earn tokens, or you can stake something and you can do other stuff. So I think it's still a very new area, but the areas that we personally do want to focus on include fractionalizing ownerships so that you can say multiple people can own a fraction of an NFT, or if you want to sell it, you want to do anything with it. I think fractionalization is quite important for people to extract value from the NFTs, as well as
Right.
collateralized loans, right? Imagine if we have metaverse items inside our marketplace, and then it's a very high value, but you don't want to sell it. You could probably lend it out for people who want a really powerful sword for another game. So I think those are areas that we do want to focus on, and I think it will drive impact and value for our community.
Yes, going back to those key features, you referenced very important ones like fractionalization with the fractional NFTs, the lease system, capacity built in, the collateralized loans, the low commission rates, and the trade. So when we talk about all these different, I guess, verticals or components or features, some of those are, I guess, the secret sauce at the beginning, but you plan to build more and more of these into a more replete platform over time. But do you think that the technology now is ready for fractionalization? I mean, are you at that stage yet, or where is that in the roadmap?
So right now we're more focused on the three verticals, right? It's establishing the marketplace, so we have a very strong foundation for people to create, discover, and also trade. So once we feel that our marketplace is at a very stable level, then we'll think about sort of how do we enable leveraging, right? So I think there's a very, very clear sort of iterative approach on how we want to do this. So regarding the tech with fractionalized ownership, I think the tech is definitely there, right? It's about, we already understand how to technically do it. I think there are other projects that also look to do the same thing,
Yes.
but we just want to centralize all of these in our platform so that people don't have to navigate out or move things from different smart contracts, so that we can give our users the most easy experience to navigate, the NFT experience, as I call it, right?
Yeah.
So the technology is definitely there. I think there's many ways to do it. I think you can, store your NFT in a vault, and then it basically extracts a certain amount of BEP20 or ERC20 tokens. But there is definitely a lot of conversation in play about what you can do with those fractionalized tokens, right? Are you creating liquidity pools from it? Are you, trading on a centralized exchange? Technically each of these tokens that generates from your fractionalized ownership are so different. So I think there's a lot of conversation in terms of how we want to do this and where does it go next, right? And so those are the questions that we want to answer first before we dive heading into this feature.
Yeah, and it's good to know that you're being so clear that it is a long roadmap. I mean, this potentially is a decade-long venture, not just for these, but when we're talking about the true potential of this, you want to be around, I'd imagine, representing what Refinable's doing for several years, because who knows what you'll actually become in the future. It really is up to you and how many different products you could add into the suite, how many different tools, how many different verticals. But at the beginning, what would you say is the most important thing people need to know for when you do launch? Like, what's that big thing that's the sales pitch for the readiness of users, so that they're prepared and then they know what to expect initially, when it's, I guess, the primary point of engagement.
Right. So it's interesting because one of my friends actually asked me this exact same question. So I gave him a relatively quirky answer, which is that I think we need to demystify what exactly NFT is, right? Because the thesis that we're adopting for our NFT marketplace is actually quite different from a lot of other NFT marketplaces out there, right? Number one is that NFT is not a mystical thing that just appreciates in value. It is simply a technology that allows you to identify any object with a unique ID, right? Very similar to a national ID or something like that. So once you start thinking about NFTs and in terms of a identification technology, then you start thinking about, okay, well, this really helps me in sort of the different transactions that I want to make online, whether I want to sell item A or want to buy item B. I think this can definitely help us with, the amount of custom logic that we can execute. Because at the end of the day, it's a technology, right? You can add
Right.
custom code, add custom logic. You can do so many crazy things with this. So I think, there's this limitless potential in terms of what NFTs can do if you understand that NFTs are not just digital art. So I think that's
Yes.
the whole point.
Well, let's run with that point. So it's not just digital art. So will you be focusing on different verticals of the arts? So music, for example, video, for example, not just focused on that traditional sort of artwork scenario that we've seen play out to really showcase the beginnings of the NFT, I guess. I wanted to try and understand, especially in Asia, where there is so much experimentation in the virtual world, in the 3D world, in different, I guess, art typologies or art genres. So, are you willing to sort of move in that direction and give more scope to where these NFTs can go?
Yeah, so I think right now the conversation around NFTs is really surrounding NFT as a store of value, right? The conversation has always been, people like to collect different things, and so if you collect different things and there's another collector that's willing to pay around the same price, then it technically has a good store of value. So I think one of the things that we want to do is, the store of value is really on a user's imparting value onto something else. But as a technology platform, where I want to focus more on is how the transaction occurs between the NFT marketplaces. So I think that's the area that we do want to focus on. And whereas the store of value, it's really up to the user about how they want to do it.
That's
Right.
true,
So
and especially because you're non-custodial, you're not managing anything for anyone. But I did want to ask you about one other thing, and this is where it gets interesting again back to Asia, and that's that collectible component. We've seen it historically that when we see the likes of Pokemon, or we see any kind of collectible fad for the decade that it's in, it sometimes outlasts that. We know that with Pokemon, it certainly has. But in Asia, particularly, there's this fascination with collectibles. So, how can that really facilitate your kind of marketplace, given that you are just really that go-to point, or you are that facilitator? Surely you could partner with different collectible, I guess, startups that are trying to showcase what the NFT can do specifically, or more importantly, how are you going to capitalize on this fact that there is this dynamic, that's very specific to Asia quite a lot of the time, when there's a lot of hype, from all kinds of different generations, all the way to, often the Middle Age and beyond. There's just a fascination, I think, that you really can capitalize in what you're doing.
Yeah, so I think collecting is really inherent to a lot of people's human nature. I think Asia definitely has the reputation for creating these like very strong collectible items like Pokemon or Digimon or Yu-Gi-Oh! And all these Asian branded IPs. But if you really think about it, even in the States, right, you have a lot of baseball cards or NBA cards that have been popular for a very long time. So collecting things is definitely in the human nature. So I think our platform, I think I touched upon this briefly, which is our platform did want to support different communities, right? So all of these things, all of these brands that people are collecting items on, they're definitely communities that exist, right? So, Refinable from day one has always been about supporting these different communities so the collecting can happen, right? But as a marketplace and platform, my technology is really there to support on the transaction side so that you can put all your different collectibles and beloved content on here so you can transact freely, and you can just focus more on the community and owning what you want and also trading with others.
That makes a lot of sense. And one of the things I did want to ask you also is, with the NFT having emerged years ago, with the likes of other, I guess, gaming platforms showcasing this, and Ethereum obviously, as a platform had shown those key standards. Why didn't things work then, Nick? Why didn't marketplaces work then compared to now? Why is it that in 2021 suddenly we've rehashed this narrative and suddenly things are much more plausible?
So that's actually a super interesting question. And I think I can only give an idea of our hypothesis on what happened. So I do think technology is always there, but it has to capture the public's imagination in certain ways. I think it was only very recently that a remix of different things that was happening in my life, as well as the news articles that were showing to me, that I realized what NFTs actually mean, right? And so I think it takes time for some of these ideas to form, especially for different keystone people, and also for the zeitgeist of the culture to kind of change a little bit. I think even 2017, people were way more focused on, say, just the ICO boom and more just blockchain technology in general, whereas people need to be more familiar with blockchain first before they can really think about, okay, what NFTs are. I mean, it took me 2-3 years to really realize this, and I think I would like to be one of the people that kind of tells people how to think about NFTs in the future and really what its impact on us really is. So I think it's a combination of a lot of cultural factors and like insights that have not yet formed back then that cause a lot of marketplaces to not be supported.
Right. And I guess to add on to that too, perhaps the technology now is better suited and situated for a
Mhm.
more true mass adoption scenario, or it potentiates that in a more true sense because of things like the BSC's affordability, its scalability. And yes, of course, we know it's a CDFI scenario, but that's part of the reason. Let's be real about that. So let's talk about, I guess, the seamlessness or the invisibility of blockchain in the most optimal scenario, where say I'm a user and I want to engage in your marketplace. Surely the blockchain knowledge is not a requisite for me to effectively engage. So do you want to just comment on this and how important it is to have that easy UX UI, that easy interaction?
Yeah, so I think I came to this realization a couple, like around a week ago, where I was talking to a couple of artists, and there's a lot more people that are not in crypto than there are people in crypto, right? So understanding that there's this statistic going on, that a lot of the people that we do want to onboard onto our platform in order to thrive in the long term, right, for longevity, is that we need to get more non-crypto people involved in this, and so the onboarding process is definitely quite important. At least for the launch, we do realize that there's certain features that we have to prioritize, and we do want to we are becoming non-custodial, so we're using wallets like MetaMask and wallet link technology and other basic wallets. So I guess we do have to assume a certain level of cryptocurrency understanding before they engage with us. And so I definitely do think there's certain education that needs to happen to bring people on board. But in the future, we definitely do want to make something that's more recognizable and more familiar to a lot of people that have never worked with, say, MetaMask or even Trust Wallet or something else. So
Right.
that's definitely on our mind. But we do have to make certain trade-offs in order to make our MVP timelines. And so that is definitely on our mind. And we do want to onboard artists from all across the board to work with us. And so we do pay attention to how users feel and how they experience our platform.
Okay. And what I'm hearing from you with what you're not saying, Nick, is that I think you know about some of these artists, that are in the pipeline. I think that some of your advisors, especially with the likes of Michael, they would be trying to help you with facilitating some of those
Mhm.
connections to bridge the gap when it comes to those parties that can, I guess, create really organic interest in their different verticals or in their
Mhm.
different communities.
Mhm.
So is that all happening now in behind the scenes?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of, I mentioned this earlier too. So there's actually quite a few artists that have reached out because, we are more accessible to users and we're NFT based. So I think that's a great validation for the work that we've done. So we are also in talks with a couple local artists that, they never worked with crypto before, but they know they're interested in this NFT space, whether or not it's because of the speculative prices or something else. I do think NFTs have a special place for a lot of different people and a lot of special meaning. And so understanding that we do want to we do want to bring more people on board, whatever their intentions are, right? I think the more eyeballs that we have and the more people start understanding and taking an effort to realize what this is about, I think that is definitely a step in the right way. So we do have artists, traditional artists that have done very well for themselves, looking to onboard. And so I can't say any more about these particular artists, but there is a lot of collaborations in the works right now. So
Hmm.
I think hopefully we'll have some really cool announcements very, very soon. I think April will be a very good time for us.
Okay, I'll just repeat that. So April is the time we need to be paying attention for some of these big announcements. Now we've seen on SNL, for example, the term NFT really just going mainstream. Even like you said, when
Mhm.
perhaps people don't understand what the gravity of it and the seriousness of it and the implications of it. But the fact that now we see the likes of people like Mark Cuban, for example, really FOMOing in, really it's captured his imagination and his wallet, and he's definitely investing in all kinds of different Ethereum-based NFT verticals, startups, etc. Surely that must excite you because you've timed this beautifully, whether you're meant to or not.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of cultural movements that's happening behind this NFT topic. So, in 2017, the conversation about blockchain has always been, people love it because it brings a lot of different topics together, like legal, like money, like technology, and all these things together. And I think NFT is bringing a lot of different topics together, similar to a blockchain. So we're really bringing like culture and art because it's a very low hanging fruit and everyone is talking about this. And it's like, how do you value items? How do art collectors make the decision on how to buy things? So I think these are all bringing to attention a lot of different aspects. I think Mark Cuban getting in is a great thumbs up for us in terms of what it can actually do. I think Mark Cuban is a lot more interested in the customizable royalty distribution. I think he even said it on, I forgot whose podcast, but essentially there are certain areas that capture the imagination of different people. And it's actually so fascinating to read about, why people are excited about this and in terms of what angle they're really looking at this from.
Yeah, it's so true. And we're seeing just all the different facets literally still form with where this could go and what can be done. But in that sense as well, it's interesting we're talking about the US as Mark, because then there's the issue of compliance and the issue of tax and the issue of, I guess, legal implications of how things are geared and viewed from the top down. So is that something that concerns you as you build out this global framework, because you're not situated just in China? The reality is it's going to be borderless. But how do you cater, how do you navigate through all the complexities of the legal and the tax side of things when it comes to NFTs?
Mm-hmm. At least we can do our part in terms of doing our due diligence to make sure that everything is above board. Again, we're more non-custodial, and so the transactions are really happening on a peer-to-peer level. So I think if we're talking about tax implications and all that, it would really have to default back to the user on exactly what their local regulations are, because there's not much that us as an organizer of the marketplace can really help with, right? We facilitate the trades and we offer an interface to work with the blockchain and work with NFTs or things on the blockchain. So there's not much that we can actually do in support of our users.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Again, it goes back to those individual sort of tax laws for every region. But then there's also the challenge of the jurisdictional and the regulatory and the compliance issues. In that, is it possible, do you think, in the future where some regions will just close down access to an NFT in the worst case scenario? For example, at the moment, there's debate happening in the US, as you'd know, about what specifically it is or how to legislate this or how to regulate this in the future if they dare try, or they probably will, being the top parties, in positions of power. So given that, again, the mechanics of blockchain are global, really unstoppable through its design, being non-custodial, being, that facilitative entity, can you do really anything in this respect? Does it fall back to the user as well?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes into the topic of community governance, right? So just to briefly talk a little bit about how we approach it is that as a marketplace, there's going to be a lot of content uploaded by our users, and it's going to be impossible for us as organizers to moderate and make sure the content is all above board. So we do want to have our users help us in sort of decentralizing the amount of moderation that can happen. So it's about the community, and the community should make sure that the rest of the community is positive and that we're on the right page, right? So when it comes down to sort of, I guess, jurisdictions and sort of limitations over there, there's not much that we can do. I mean, we definitely want to be, partners with, local jurisdictions, and we do want to comply with different laws. And so if there's anything that we can do in terms of just like unlisting something so people don't have access to a certain type of content, I think that's the most that we can do. But because of the mechanics of the blockchain technology, you can't actually remove something. I think that is both a feature and a bug that people should be aware about. But I think this brings into question about how exactly jurisdiction and power and regulation is going to apply to technology, something that is relatively borderless. And I think this is all going to start new conversations that's going to happen in around, say, like 2 to 5 years. I think regulation definitely lags a little bit behind by a few years. And it's also powered by people that have the right intentions, but they just don't have the right insights into the right aspects.
Yeah, I think you raise a great point, and we've seen the acceleration of sort of the top-down interest and activity in recent, I would say in the last year particularly. So it's going to, I would imagine, accelerate even faster in the next few years. Just simply because of the likes of people like Mark Cuban, other mainstream players like Elon Musk and others who are really starting to voice the blockchain conversation publicly, and they just have such immense reach to start to ruffle feathers and make people aware. Now, with regard to the actual token with Fine, I wanted to discuss that because you touched on this also indirectly with references to, the many facets of the utility or the governance model. So do you want to just discuss exactly how this token works in the broader picture of the emerging system and the verticals that you do want to establish, so we understand no matter how big you grow, this will always be the centerpiece of everything, that one key utility / governance token?
Yeah, so when we first designed the platform, we definitely wanted our own native token that kind of powers and allows people to have a more elevated experience compared to regular users. So, the great example is, say, eBay Carousel, right? So, there are certain power-up features, I would call them, that, increases exposure or gives you a little bit more leeway in terms of how you create your listings. So we do want to do the same thing. So that's why we have our own Fine token. And so, the base use case is really you can use the Fine token to settle your different transaction, right? That's very, very normal. The second tier is really about you can spend these Fine tokens because we're a marketplace, to get the priority listing in order to make your listing more apparent and to get more eyeballs on it, right? So it's very similar to more of an advertising approach. So holding tokens as well is another use case that we have. So for there are people that make their livelihoods on these secondary platforms, right? And so we do anticipate the same thing to happen. And if they want to, they can definitely stake or hold our own tokens to give them benefits such as discounted trading fees, or increased access or limitations on their creation and trading features. So we do think for people that want to have a livelihood based on trading these secondary assets, this is definitely a worthwhile way to increase your chances of success. And the last place is really, I kind of touched upon this in the last question, which is really on the community governance and moderation aspect, right? We really want to hear from our users in terms of where we want to go, because we understand the NFT experience is still very, very new, and we're going to be on this journey with our community as well. And so for them to for users that hold our own token, we do believe that they are more verified and valued user of our community because they hold our tokens. And so we want to give them a way to sort of voice and vote on proposals that would go straight into the development cycle. And so the counterpart of that is really on the community moderation and how content is moderated. So users who hold our tokens would definitely be more valued users to us. And so by giving them a voice in terms of being ambassadors of what our Refinable brand is going to be, I think that's quite important for them to have the responsibility to carry our mission forward by moderating content on our behalf as well. But what exactly that's going to look like will have to be determined, because it's very process heavy. It's not a technology thing, right?
Right, exactly. And obviously this could become, a very popular sort of design, because one of the things I have noticed is you build in incentives and bounties right from the outset. You see this coming through in the Twitter feed as well. So incentives and staking, they are things that are built in properly. Obviously, another aspect of utility is the voting component. It's a true, very robust utility token by design. And that's important, once again, also for the legal representation of the token in form. So I did want to ask you, what entity are you engaging with, or what country specifically, when it comes to setting up this startup? How did you go about making sure there were proper checks and balances done to build out Refinable?
Mm-hmm. So we definitely did want to, build a company that's based in a jurisdiction that's relatively crypto friendly and also close to home. So I'm personally based in Hong Kong, and so Refinable Limited is really based in Hong Kong, and so we intend to fully comply with all the regulations that are over here as well. So we do think there's a new crypto community popping up and around here, and I definitely do want to build out this community of just crypto projects in general based in Asia, right, close to Binance Smart Chain. I think that kind of helps with the synergies that can come out with being close to proximity to all these other players.
Yeah, and that's really good to know, especially with Singapore, literally around the corner, and they are one of the most progressive hubs of blockchain in the world. So with the raise, let's roll up the sleeves and talk about, the money side of things. Now, you were successful in doing one, so congratulations. You had a significant number you had important investors, especially in the Asian region, to complete that raise. So do you want to just give us some key information about things like the lockup, the price, how many rounds, all those things that, it would be uncomfortable to, talk about all the time, but we do need to get into those fundamental key facts when it comes to the raise itself.
Yeah, sure. So I actually really like talking about our how we structured our token raise because we think we did a very objective and fair structure for how the raise is going to be. So we're raising a total of 3 million. It's just slightly above 3 million. And we have only two rounds, which is a public and a private round. So the private round basically means, all the internal team members, as well as investors that we brought on at the very late stage, all with the same deal. And the difference between the two token prices for the two rounds is less than 10%. So it's extremely small. And we do think that is something the community will definitely like because there was no seed round, there was no
Wow.
extra
So no
investment.
seed at all, no preferential. Wow, that's great
Yeah,
because we always or almost always see a seed round. That's really starkly different to everything else. So you're saying you've got none of that preferential, none of that seed. It's just simply two rounds with slight differentiation of, a roughly 10% amount.
right. So I think we all got the same deal, and I think it kind of aligns the incentives of the team that we do want to hold it for the long term, and that there really isn't any special benefits for us. Right, we're all in the same boat, and
Wow.
hopefully the community kind of understands that and is appreciative of what we're trying to do.
That's very cool. And I had a look at the distribution as well in the pie chart that you had. I want to talk about that just more very quickly. But I also want to ask you, how much do you intend to give to the public in that public round comparatively? Because often we see, Nick, that it's a very small amount and that creates a lot of hype and a lot of attention. But it also, pardon my French, but it pisses some people off because they're all wanting to get into that small
Yeah.
amount. So let's open this up. Let's go transparent as possible. What's the likelihood of everyone vying into a very small amount that's offered at that particular that particular instance of the public raise?
Yeah, so I think the way that we structured our token sale and that the private and public sale have a very negligible difference in price, and because there's no seed round, that we did structure our public sale to be relatively small. So it's going to be slightly under 100,000. And so we do think because it's relatively small and the prices are very different, prices are very similar,
Mm.
that there shouldn't be, there's a lot of room for growth as well as for people to get it on the secondary market. So I think that is sort of the general approach that we do want to take. And we think there's still a very, very, community centric way of structuring our sale.
Yeah, you know what I really like as well, because you know that I want to be an investor in this project, is that there's also so much scope and there's no
Mhm.
stress, in terms of jumping into a secondary in this design, because it isn't
Mhm.
that different. And so what happens is we don't know what's going to happen in the secondary market as things play out, but the reality is that it's designed for democracy so that the retailers aren't going to have a vast difference, you would imagine, from those parties, those two rounds. Is that a fair sort of assumption, or do you think it could come out where the hype just drives this so rapidly? Because that could happen too. I mean, you've got Michael Good behind you. You never know what this guy can do.
That's true. That's true. But at least the I think the marketing is a little bit uncontrollable in terms of how people perceive the project. I think doing these interviews, kind of like getting our thesis out there and letting people know what we're about, I think that's already very helpful for us. And so I think what we can do is basically structure the token raise in a way that kind of makes sense for everyone involved. And I think that's the minimum or the most that we can really do from where we're standing, right? And I think it's we haven't really decided on what we're doing for our public sale in terms of the
Of the,
dates.
of the method. What about the method? Let's talk about that. So I knew you would want to talk about this, but we know for the likes of Michael Good with all his experience, he certainly would be an advocate for things
Mhm,
like launch pads. He would know the whole arena, right from
mhm,
the coin list options, everything between. He would know all the exchanges. Let's be
mhm.
real. I mean, Michael, he's an advisor in his own right, absolutely. So you have everything at your disposal, and you also have Binance right there as an investor. So naturally, people could rightly assume eventually this is going to Binance. Don't comment on that. That's just what I can say. But let's be real about the beginnings. You have a lot of choices.
Yeah, so we do have a lot of choices, and we have been in conversations with the right partners to play. I think right now we're most concerned with the timeline that we do want to approach these strategic talks, and so we are talking to different launch pads, and I think the value in launch pads that bring is like different types of community that can get access to get exposure to our project as well. And so I think right now it's really about finding the right community that makes the most sense for us, and And yeah, I think it's really about finding long-term partners and people that really believe in the vision. And so, hopefully all these launchpad communities will be watching these videos. So, we're not just a blank.
They're going to be all vying for your attention, I'm sure, because when you couple things like what you are, as we discussed with this lengthy interview, then you realize that there is a huge community built around BSC. Then the launchpad effect in and of itself has been a phenomenon, especially certain launchpads who Michael certainly does know. And then on top of that, you also have these mechanisms and these dynamics that happen behind the scenes, where you have all these different influencers, working with different launch pads, because obviously that's, they've worked hard for those relationships. And so looking at all the evidence empirically, I would suspect that your token, for all the dynamic that comes through, is really going to capture the imagination of a lot of people. And so it is going to be interesting to see when this plays out. But I do really appreciate we pull back to the fact you only had those 2 rounds. And that gives me personally a lot of confidence hearing that. It creates a lot of trust, and which we all need when we see a lot of shill effects, where we see a lot of BS in the space too, where we see a lot of people trying to capitalize on that early seed round scenario. So thank you for letting us know you're doing something a little different. Now, going back to that token distribution, what is interesting is that you have about 20% for that token sale we're talking about, but you've allocated a lot of money to the treasury fund. Why did you do that?
So I think the treasury fund is sort of this big sort of bucket for us to encapsulate all the costs that could probably go into, say, marketing and development costs and all the other, special projects that we do want to fund. So I think it kind of gives us a little bit more flexibility in terms of how we want to, distribute the content, distribute the tokens, so more people can have access and easier access into our platform. So the treasury fund is really out there for us to, execute with a certain level of responsibility, right? So I think it just gives us more flexibility in terms of how we want to structure this. And I think that flexibility is quite important for us launching the project. And of course, we're very conscious of sort of the amount of tokens that are released into the ecosystem, and we will definitely be working hard to not, over dilute the market, right?
And that's what I wanted to check. I wanted to find out how accessible that treasury was, because a lot of these things are locked up for periods of time in the distribution model, but I wasn't sure about that treasury.
Yeah, so I think I believe 35% is marketed for the treasury fund, and I believe it's vesting at 10%
Okay.
per quarter, right?
Okay.
So we do have vesting schedules for most of our token, supply, and so just to make sure that people don't do crazy stuff.
Yeah, and I wanted to check with also just generally the team. I think it's a 1 year cliff, and then it's quarterly. Is that right? Over the course of the next year. Okay, so that, that's not too bad, because if it was just over the vesting for a year, I'd have a red flag for you. But that cliff is important because it gives you time to really build, and it creates also trust in everybody who's supporting you in the secondary market and just in the broader space of crypto as a community, knowing that you do have these sort of protections in place, these insurance policies, which are the vesting and the cliffs and the lockups. And just generally, is that being the rule of thumb where the rough ballpark amount of time is about a year for the majority of these different, components of the distribution model, the different parties?
I think a year is a very standard agreement that we can basically, have for our team. I think the vesting period also happens over the course of, I believe, 5 quarters as well. So I think the kind of extended time frame kind of gives a little perspective in terms of how how we want the longevity of the product to survive, right? I think the incentives are in line with sort of us staying for the long term. I think that's definitely something we do want to approach, right? The product is definitely going to stay for a long while, and we do want to have our teams basically be able to stick with it for the long while as well.
Yeah. So how are you going to incentivize your advisors, your team, to stick around the long term, knowing that, let's say, we're talking about decades potentially. If you really want your team to be there in 5 years, or if you want to still be there, really pushing this forward, how do you do that when every single team does have to have an endpoint with their vesting? That's the reality, and it's not going to be 5 years, that's for sure, not in this climate. But how do you get them to stick around for 5 years? What's the secret sauce there?
Yeah, so we actually don't have that many advisors. I think we're very selective about the different investors and advisors that we do take on. So we actually don't have anyone else except for Michael at this point. And so Michael has definitely been for us since day one. So he works in the gaming space and he's a huge proponent of NFTs, and I think he really believes in the vision that we have. So it's really about finding people that, number one, are on board with the long-term vision that we have. I think that the qualitative aspect is the most important part, right?
Mm.
I think any advisors that are mostly just in it for the tokens is definitely not in it for the right purposes.
What about Nick, the team though? Sometimes, as you know, in the past, sometimes team members even leave as soon as they access their tokens or quickly thereafter. So how do you incentivize them? Because if they're similar to or equal to the schedules of the advisors, then again, how do you incentivize them to really just continue to do excellent
Mhm.
work, to uplift the integrity of the code and the products and the overall platform for well in the future, well past the date in which they get their last unlock.
Yeah, I think that kind of speaks to the kind of team that we do want to build and the culture that we're kind of instilling, right? I think users should definitely be part of this journey if they believe in the journey and they think this is a great place to build out, a great product and also build out the new vision for digital commerce, moving forward. So I think if users do want to leave at the end and then they're not part of the project, I think there's not much that we can do, and I think we can definitely find other users that are more in line with our vision. So I think it's more about us, letting other people know what exactly we're about and why we're different and why this is a place that they should be a part of. So I think
Mm.
the qualitative aspect is way more important than any sort of quantitative aspects that I can even offer, right? And
Yes.
so there's not much that we can do, and hopefully we are just hiring the right team and the right people. And hiring is always the most difficult aspect of starting a new team, right?
Yeah, and you certainly seem to be continually employing and hiring and advertising for more as you grow. And so I guess the other thing I wanted to ask you, which is a direct question, is do you think it's fair, given that you have Michael behind the scenes really doing a lot of work, naturally as any good advisor would do you think it's fair for me to hypothesize that you have coordinated or organized or at least
Mhm.
liaised in some way with different exchanges? Or are they coming to you? To create these conversations. And on top of that, another really tough question to jump in with it, and that's liquidity support as well. I mean, I know these are tough, but these are parts of the things that advisors
Mhm.
really look into. So are these discussions that you're having, or are these considerations with among the team?
Yeah, I think these are definitely considerations. I think there are several exchanges that have already reached out saying they want to list us, but I think at this point it's almost moot for us to even focus on these aspects right now, right? I think
Okay.
Michael has been super helpful and sort of making sure that our priorities are straight for the short term and also for the medium and long term. And so right now these conversations they're not really beneficial to our product and the vision in the short term. And so even though they have approaches, we haven't really engaged or even talked about or furthering the idea of these items.
Got it.
Um, and so, as you know, Binance invested in us and they've been supporting us on mostly the product and the networking side, but there hasn't been any conversations on,
Not
placing
yet. Not
on
yet. Not yet, Nick. So backers, let's talk about them. So what kind of things do they offer, Nick? Well, we can liken this to Michael, for example, the vast
Mhm.
resources that he has. This can be amplified by the backers that you work with. So you have the likes of GBV, you've got AU21, Binance, as we know, X21, Double Peak as well. That's a specific, group of people. Many of them, there's a connection with Asia as well. So, what do you think, in your experience, is something that goes beyond money that they offer? Obviously, there was something that got them over the line that wasn't just by association or network, hopefully.
Hmm. So I think our token sale happened over the course of around a month and a little bit longer. So of course the initial aspect was really about getting our foot in the door and getting us started. So I think some of the funds basically offered a lot of beginning support, and we were very thankful for that. Right. So essentially setting up the company, talking to the right people, and accessing the right teams. I think that's all very important because in order for the product to succeed, there is a huge crypto community that we needed to tap into to ensure that we have a great, start, right? And so the crypto community is definitely people who are more familiar with what we're doing and understands. So I think that in the initial reach is very important for us to work with the funds. But later on, we were very selective about people that we do want to work with. And we always tell different investors that approach us that the two things that we don't think, we think we need more help with, that we would like for different investors to bring on, is really about access to different types of content and also user onboarding, right? Those are the things that no matter what kind of fund you are, it's a more specific skill set that they can drag in. And so we're really looking past the crypto space and really about sort of how robust is the community that we can tap into in the long term, so that we can have more longevity and also value extraction from our investors.
Yeah, well, having Binance in that list is going to be a major thing because obviously they have a lot of reach just in their own right. And one of the things I also wanted to talk to you about was the white paper. I had a look at it, obviously read it. I felt more like a cross over between a pitch deck and a white paper. The way it was designed. Was that deliberate? Was that to try and get the average everyday person engaged with the white paper design? Because it certainly wasn't really detailed. Didn't require a maths degree, that's for sure.
Yeah, so I think the NFT marketplace is ultimately, we're not doing anything extremely technically advanced, right? So it's at the first and foremost, it's really more of a retail application for people to interface with the blockchain. So there wasn't much that we could expand on technically. I think we do have a section stored for leveraging additional tokens. So I think those will definitely come at a later point in time when our marketplace is a lot more stable. So it's definitely a part of our intention for writing the general white paper, is to get people more excited about the long-term vision of what NFTs is possible, right? I think it's about creating the initial community for us, right? So that's why it was written that way.
Got it. Well, thank you again for that explanation. It makes sense. Now, the website, as we've also talked about in pre-interview, what's going on with that? Because it's not exactly the most user-friendly visual, and it looks a little bit like I guess a beta phase of something to come. So, is there more coming? Are we going to see a revamp of this as well, Nick?
Yeah, so that's all definitely part of our marketing plan. That's so funny that you actually brought this up, because that is definitely a conversation topic within the team. And so this week we're looking to make a pretty big press release. And so after that press release has gone out, then we're gonna couple up with a new website and make everything look appropriate for our investors as well. So yeah, you're spot on, and that is something that we are ready to go live with the new website. And so we're just waiting for the marketing push to happen.
Right. Well, perfect segue with the marketing push. Now, obviously, with knowing Michael for some time in the space of box mining, he is very skilled at trying to facilitate in the marketing domain as well. He has a lot of friends in the space who are serious movers and shakers when it comes to reach and attention. You would know that. So, what can you tell us? I mean, I'm imagining some superstar, big names in the influencer realm who are going to no doubt touch on what you're doing, highlight what you're designed to do, explain and extrapolate on the NFTs. Are you confident that just with the connections that he has, that you're going to have immense support from the beginning when it comes to West and East?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a certain level of support that we can expect from, advisor being box mining. And so there will definitely be a level of support from the crypto community because, box mining is a very reputable name inside the space. And so I think it's actually fantastic for us to have this kind of early support, right? And people that can listen to the vision and understand what we're trying to build. But I think extrapolating a little bit further on, we have to expand the support beyond the crypto community as well. So it's really about influencing and sort of convincing other people to join our community of the shared vision of what NFTs can do, right? So, Michael was super, super helpful, but at some point in time, we definitely have to expand beyond.
Exactly. And he would want that too. He would no doubt want to sort of facilitate and learn all those different conduits and parties that sort of stretch and bridge, that crypto chasm, I guess, or the mainstream to crypto. But in that sense, I guess I wanted to ask you, are you currently, I guess, moving in that direction where you're liaising with different parties that are agencies perhaps in those regions, because as you'd appreciate, it's not just people like Michael who are excellent ambassadors for the space and can bridge it, but he would also know many agencies within crypto that facilitate in terms of legitimate marketing, that want to uplift the integrity of good startups, but that happens in the real world too. So are you looking at the potential of agencies, the right kinds of influencers, in those spaces that can really start the conversation?
I think definitely that's part of the game plan, right? For us to, engage with, influencers and users of not belonging to the crypto community. We haven't engaged any particular agencies yet, but we have been engaging, artists from all walks of life, in different regions as well. Like I mentioned before, we did have a lot of organic interest from artists that do want to work with us because we're, more accessible, we're a lot cheaper, as well as we're NFT. And so I think those are all like great validations for the work that we're trying to do. And so, yeah, it's definitely a huge concern of us to really expand beyond the crypto community and into sort of the actual real world.
Yeah, it's daunting, but it's definitely going to happen. Now, the question of dates, when are you anticipating, these key milestones of launching, with your mainnet? I think, as we talked about before, it's Q2, but when do you envision that this is all going to come to that very important culmination of a token launch? So that the speculators can really start to rush in and the FOMO and hype will all come with it.
Oh man, that's yeah, so we are still working on finalize some of the dates, but within the team, we do want to do all the things that you just mentioned, including the token generation and the public sale sometime in April. I do think this is a fantastic time to really launch the project. We do want to get our public beta out shortly very after, hopefully before May. So we're just finalizing some of these dates for our team because we want to underpromise and overdeliver always. And so that's sort of the approach that we're generally trying to
Got it. Okay, so April, May, that's what I'm hearing from you. I'll translate it as that, and let's see what happens. Because what I do like is that you are prepared and bold enough to perhaps launch when things aren't perfect, because it never will be. And so you tweak this, you get things right in that April scenario, and let's see what happens from there. But, it's going to be interesting in the next few months to see what does emerge. And certainly the community is listening and paying attention, especially the BSC community. I mean, they would be very hyped about all of this. And I guess that leads to the last point, when we see the likes of Mark Cuban, we see CoinDesk, discussing NFTs regularly throughout the week, and Cointelegraph and many other crypto media channels. We see OpenSea, Elon Musk, we see the Nifty Gateway, and we see all the conversations from the legal to literally, I guess, the influencer hype and everything between, even with influencers creating their own NFT related startups themselves. It's a really interesting dynamic that's emerging. So what's your sort of final statement regarding the shape, the sentiment, the way things are playing out? Are we actually moving to a situation that's literally a perfect storm for your launch?
Yeah, I do think this is kind of reminiscent of the different hype cycles that have happened in the past before. So you see a lot of a huge wave of just interest that kind of happens. I think at some point that the interest will kind of have to do a little dip so that people are more in tune with technology and try to understand, right? I think with the dip, it's really going to come with a lot of technological understanding and improvements. And I think that's really good for the system as a whole. So I think right now the conversation, as I mentioned before, is really on NFT and how prices are insane. But there's still an air of mysticism that surrounds NFTs in general. And I think once that mysticism is really gone and people are really more explaining NFTs in the normal language sense, I think that's really when we'll see a lot of different changes that will happen in terms of how people think about NFTs, how regulation is even talked about with NFTs, and sort of what people think NFTs will do in the future, right? I do think NFTs will be as common as any like UPC barcode later on into the future. I think that's sort of a vision that we have. And we're really excited to just be, one of the projects at the start to really help build out that vision. So we're super excited about what's going to happen in the next year, in the next 3 and 5 years. So we'd love to just be at the forefront of this experience.
Well, you definitely are, and that forefront is, key to, I guess, the exciting aspect of this being a first mover with the BSC. Certainly, the Binance is going to capitalize on this. They're going to be loving the fact that they are entering into this sort of partnership with you to really see what can be done. And as you said, the NFT is that technology, it's that identifier. It's really going to be something quite experimental and certainly move into the mainstream. And what is really interesting is that potentially this is going to decouple in terms of the bull bear runs that we do see. as this starts to be, something proven in the mainstream domain as well, because that's when things start to get interesting as a financial, experiment with regard to the value that each of these NFTs have. And that's all by community determination and design. So the bigger that is built, the more exciting this is going to be for you as a marketplace. And I wish you all the very best, Nick. It's important everyone knows that. I think what an NFT is today, if SNL know, then everyone perhaps should, because it's time to really, switch on when it comes to blockchain innovation. And NFT is definitely part of the conversation with 221. So keep building. If you'd like to know more, obviously, about Refinable, make sure you look at the links below. I will put everything I can possibly find there. But most importantly, go to the source, go to Nick, go to the team, find their social channels. Nick, do you want to give them a plug really quickly to let people know exactly where to go? Where's the best place to learn?
Yeah, so in order for us to stay updated with the community updates, definitely follow our Telegram or Twitter. I think most of the marketing team is basically updating the sources over there every day. So feel free to reach out to the team to ask any questions, especially on Twitter. I think there is a lot of questions and a lot of answers being thrown around. So pay attention to any AMAs that are potentially going on as well. So I will be answering some of those questions personally. So looking forward to see everyone over there, and we're super excited to have everyone on board.
Absolutely, mate. Well, thank you so much for a very long interview. You have survived. And if you are listening right now, you've made it to the end. Congratulations. Pat yourself on the back. This has all been about trying to provide all of us more information from the source. And Nick really is the best that can be offered anywhere in the world. More important than really any secondary voice or third party. Even Michael Gu, dare I say, who knows a lot of stuff when it comes to NFTs. It is that team that you want to hear from. So until we catch up again, Nick, to get more information on an update, I wish you the best. Keep going, keep building, and make those NFTs real, make them valuable, and make them something that we can engage in a way we simply haven't before. And that's with a non-custodial platform that lets us engage as we should, and that is with our own free will, according to a global design.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brad. It was a pleasure being on here talking with you as always. Super appreciate all the support, and yeah, I'll see you around.
Absolutely, mate. Take care.